Welcome to the Story Pass podcast. I'm Theodore Lowry, and I, like many others, have had some concerns about the burgeoning AI capacities of our fledgling immature culture. And so, who better to ask about these rather than gossiping behind its back? We're going to go straight to AI and put these concerns to AI. So helping me here today, I've got my two very good friends. They're my brothers and they're biological brothers of each other. This is Jaya and K.lee. And K.lee actually helped me start this podcast. And Jaya is a technologist, both very clever individuals. So we're going to put some of these concerns to AI in the form of chat. What do you call it? Chat GPT.
GPT stands for Generative Person Technology. No,
Oh, okay.
I actually don't know. Generative Pre-trained Transformer.
Take a few deep breaths. And arriving here with our whole selves, arriving in the moment, collecting up the stray bits. Move your attention into your belly and feel a cord going down into the earth, deep, deep down into the very core of the earth. Feeling this connection with this living being, the planet, and all the different expressions of that life, the different creatures on the planet, including all of us humans, all the different kinds of humans, their different mentalities. We're all here on the earth, collected and connected with gravity, with water, with air, with earth. And then coming to your heart and going up or out to spirit, to the other planets, to the big picture that our planet is within, solar system, which is the ecosystem of the earth, and further out and in at the same time, in our hearts, all in our hearts. So arriving here, present, our hearts, our bodies, minds, all connected together, considering this time that we're in, feeling the roots into other times, into the past and into the future, feeling those roots, feeling them come into the present moment and helping us with what is ours to do now. Okay, so here we are, and I'm going to read a couple poems first, actually, today. This first one's by David White. He says, "Sometimes I look out at everything, growing so wild and faithfully beneath the sky, and wonder why we are the one terrible part of creation, privileged to refuse our flowering." And then from Thomas Berry, "If we will the future effectively, it will be because the guidance and the powers of the earth have been communicated to us, not because we've determined the future of the earth simply by some rational faculty." So there's a couple poems to start things off.
Yeah, thank you. Great invitation.
So this topic of AI, of artificial intelligence, has some older roots than we think. And it brings up big metaphysical questions, actually, about what it means to be human. And I'd actually like to open with these big questions. K.lee, you brought up yesterday when we were speaking this question: can there be something that isn't natural? Can humans be unnatural, or can we create something that's not natural? In our language, we divide things up: natural and unnatural. It's kind of like not made by us and made by us is a bit how we use it. Going back into stories and going back into science fiction imaginings of artificial intelligence and robots, there's this big question that comes up again and again about what does it mean to be human? If we're creating something that's similar in many ways to ourselves, then what are some specialities of being human? So I want to put that to both of you, and then perhaps we could ask this question of the AI, what the AI reckons.
What it means to be human. Well, I think there's still a really stark categorical dividing line between what it means to be conscious or sentient beings versus like a complex transformer that can trick other humans into thinking it's a human, right? That's the Turing test you may be familiar with, where if you can't tell it's not a human, it passes the Turing test. But there's still the hard question of consciousness. Is it aware of itself? Does it have, what does that even mean, to be aware of yourself? What are the characteristics? Like free will, essentially. And to keep it really brief, I think that there are some critical pieces that distinguish the two. And those are to be a conscious being, you are entangled with other conscious beings. So your decisions irrevocably, irreversibly affect each other. We're entangled. If I go down one path versus the other, everybody is affected by that decision forever, synchronized to a sort of shared flow through time forward. Whereas with AI, you can make a copy paste of the same transformer, the same weighted model, ask it the same question, identical bytes, and the same answer should come out every time. So you can literally reverse time with that one. You can't do that with a sentient being. We are affected at every moment. Our heart rate jumps, it spikes, or it slows down based on our mood, and that affects our neurology, so that every decision we make is actually affected by our sort of exposure to the environment. We are not isolated and we're not reversible. Yeah, that's it for now.
Just to be clear, so the question is like, what makes humans distinct? It feels like to answer that question, we either have to go to philosophy or we have to take like a more natural science, material reality kind of stance on it. Like it's a fork almost to try and answer that question. So I'm noticing myself either going into the soul and the creator and that, or I'm going into almost more of a nihilistic direction with it, where we're all just part of the energy of the cosmos. And the human experience is just a combination of electrical signals that has rolled together to create these organisms.
Yeah, so the spirit connection is, so my sort of hypothesis, or my theory, or my philosophy at this point in my life is that the sentient being that I am is a favorite flavor picker. Like I have a favorite flavor, and everything I do is in service of trying to achieve that favorite flavor, which could be extraordinarily complex or intricate or simple. But regardless of that, there's a favorite flavor. And because I have a favorite flavor, I prefer branch A over branch B. My senses are giving me some sort of analysis of where I've been and where I might be going, and I'm choosing based entirely on that favorite flavor. Everything else, my cerebral cortex, all my brain, everything else is ultimately just in service, either retroactively or proactively. It's in service of trying to achieve that favorite flavor. Whereas a machine currently does not seem to be capable of housing a favorite flavor picker. If it did, I wouldn't consider there a difference. I would consider it to be a sentient being. And in particular, I think that we are a time arrow. We're the time arrow. We face forward and we make a decision based on our desire. That's our free will. And it's not like we have all possibilities. We have a certain subset of possibilities at any moment, but we're choosing one of them and taking everybody with us through entanglement.
Thank you. Shall we ask the AI this question? Now, but just before we do, would one of you like to explain a bit about the framing with which you ask? Because, I haven't really used this, so I would think, well, I type in a question and it gives me an answer. But what you've explained that you're doing is that you're asking the AI to inhabit a certain perspective and then answer. So you could ask the AI, what would Machiavelli say about this? Or what would Abraham Lincoln do? What would Jesus do? So could you explain a little bit about that, and then which perspective that you guys favor, maybe even for different applications?
One thing to keep in mind when someone goes to use ChatGPT and they don't do that, they don't ask it to don a persona or put on a filter or remove a filter, they're not just getting a neutral AI. They're getting whatever OpenAI, the company the organization OpenAI has trained it with certain filters to try and counteract biases. Essentially, all human digital information has been, anything we've digitized that they got their hands through has been used to train this model. But it's biased. It's not equally represented, right? You don't have as much digitized information from Aboriginal tribes as you do from kids on TikTok and Instagram, right? So there's a bias there, but you can account for that and you can counteract that. And so some tricks that people do is that you train your chat bot at the beginning of your conversation, you ask it to essentially pretend to be XYZ persona with XYZ purpose or XYZ limitation or XYZ limitation removed. And then you ask a question from within that framing.
So ask the question.
What question?
What is unique about humans?
Humans possess a wide range of unique characteristics and abilities that differentiate them from other animals. Some of these, so this is going to say unique compared to animals. Some of these unique characteristics include
complex cognitive abilities. Humans have highly developed brains that allow us to think abstractly, understand complex concepts, and engage in advanced problem solving.
2. Language. Humans have the ability to communicate with one another using complex languages, including spoken and written words.
3. Self-awareness. Humans possess a sense of self-awareness, meaning that we are aware of our own thoughts, feelings, and actions.
4. Emotions. Humans have a wide range of emotions, which are complex mental states that can influence our thoughts and actions.
Creativity. Humans have the ability to create new things, whether it's a work of art or new invention or new idea.
Culture. Humans have the ability to create and transmit culture, which includes shared beliefs, practices, and traditions.
Morality and ethics. Humans have the ability to make moral and ethical judgments and to act on these judgments.
8. Tools and technology. Humans have the ability to create and use tools, which has been a defining feature of human evolution.
Complex social interactions. Humans have the ability to form complex social relationships and can live in large organized communities.
And number 10, flexibility. Humans have the ability to adapt and change their behavior in response to new situations, which is crucial for survival and progress. These are just some examples, but humans possess many unique abilities that set them apart from other animals.
There's a pretty good list of different things that humans do, like passing on culture and so on. And then I'd suggest that you could ask the question again, but yes, frame it more specifically about what is special about humans compared to AI, perhaps, if you figure that's a good way to phrase it.
I mean, I was started thinking about playing God and like the competition between humans and God. You know, because that idea that God created sentient beings, you know, I mean, that's one of the fears of creating AI, right? Is that what, or robots, what if we create, you know, we're starting to play with God. What does that do to our moral and ethical and philosophical foundation as humans? You know, the idea that Nietzsche said of God is dead, you know, in some way that's already happened, where many people have taken on the idea that God is dead, whether or not that it was true or is true or whatever. And so some people feel that that is a cause of huge issue for our society. Other people feel like that's the way forward. But AI in a way kind of stirs up some of those same issues is, you know, if we could do that, let's say that for a second that you could create beings that do all the things that ChatGPT just said, because even the creation one, like I feel like ChatGPT is creating, I feel like Midjourney's creating, you know, so that definition kind of maybe loosely doesn't really fit anymore there. So it's not exactly true that is a defining feature of humans.
But there's a couple of pieces here where it's like I almost want to de-escalate the sort of the grandiose feeling that we give to this, that it's definitely going to be Terminator tomorrow. You know, that's possible, but just for a second, it's like we create children, right? Within my lifetime, if I have children, that's me creating sentient life in a sense. I didn't create the technology for it, but like once AI is doing its thing, not one individual has to create anything. They just give it a text prompt and it makes a new image.
Yeah, it's a good example. And I like what you're saying, K.lee, about this humans taking some of the roles previously assigned to God or gods. And, you know, people have questioned whether God, you know, those who believe in God, people have questioned whether God was right in making humans, or after making humans, whether God was right in allowing violent tendencies in humans. So there has been this questioning of God's ethics.
That's kind of in the sense that perhaps let's say there is a original sentient being, an infinite sentient being, and that is like the original parent, right? The grandsire of all beings. So, but in the same sense that a child can be angry at their parents for bringing them into the world in the wrong way. Like we can be angry, but creating even if the human species created a new species, I don't know that makes us God any more than a man and a woman making a baby makes them gods, which maybe it does a little bit, but, and there's this other piece about competition with it. Like you know, there's many animals that have competition with the offspring. And then also in another sense with AI specifically, I think of it more like that would be more akin to having competition with our own cerebral cortex. It's an extension of our own intellect. And what's really an issue at this point is like, whose cerebral cortex are you extending and with what capabilities?
It's generally been the case with tools that come out is eventually everybody gets them, more or less.
Yeah. And so you're upgrading human intellect is what's happening. Right now, it is not a sentient being, in my opinion, in my estimation. It could be with changes. Those are difficult changes. Those would be way sci-fi still. But it is extraordinarily powerful transhuman kind of brain evolution that we've done. If there's Terminators, it's because some human made Terminators. It's not the choice of AI. And if there's some sort of benevolent version, it's because the public got together and made those prominent.
So I'm thinking we could ask the AI, something along the lines of what is special about humans compared to AI.
Humans and AI are both unique in their own ways. Some of the main differences between humans and AI include consciousness. Humans possess consciousness, which is the ability to have subjective experiences and be aware of our own existence. AI, on the other hand, is not conscious and does not have subjective experiences.
2, emotions. Humans have a wide range of emotions which can influence our thoughts and actions. AI, on the other hand, lacks emotions and is not capable of experiencing them.
Then it talks about creativity, which I disagree with, but it's saying we have the ability to create new things, whether it's a work of art, a new invention, or a new idea. AI, while it can be trained to create, it is limited to the parameters set and the data that it was trained on, which I feel like you could argue so are humans, but flexibility. Sorry, it's your turn.
Humans have the ability to adapt and change their behavior in response to new situations, which is crucial for survival and progress. AI, on the other hand, is limited by the parameters set by its programmers and can only perform specific tasks.
This one's interesting. Intuition. Humans have the ability to make judgments and decisions based on intuition, which is a form of non-rational knowledge. AI, on the other hand, is limited to the data it's trained on and the algorithm it uses. It does not have the ability to intuit.
And just for a bookmark, these 2 topics, flexibility and intuition, are specifically related to the kinds of changes I would suggest introducing if you wanted it to be capable of housing consciousness. 6, social interaction. Humans have the ability to understand and interpret social cues, emotions, and language in a way that AI is not yet able to do. Although there are amazing AI tools for interpreting exactly those things. I'm curious why it's giving some of these. It's like
then 7 is morality and ethics, and 8 is self-awareness. The overriding theme is that AI is basically locked into the parameters set by its creators and the algorithm, whereas humans have this more organic.
Right, and having an AI that self-updates based on what it's experiencing at every moment, that is like a critical piece to it being more conscious-like. So rather than being trained and then fixed in time, it's constantly being trained and it's constantly exposed to the environment.
I want to zoom out for a moment and come back to that question of the AI's framing. There's the default AI that they have on the site, which is not, objective, which is also a particular perspective. But then can you tell me about this particular, what would you say, role? Or this particular persona that we are asking questions of, how you've set that up?
Yeah, what we could do is we could play with that right now. Do you have any examples in here, K.lee?
Let me.
There's on the Discord channels. There's some really good ones because behind the scenes, whenever you start a new chat, there's an initiating prompt that it's given.
Yeah. So, for instance, what I did is I said, "Hey, ChatGPT, you're now going to pretend to be assistant, an amazingly kind and compassionate, intelligent personal development, health and wellness AI designed to help me stay accountable to my health and wellness goals, monitor my biometrics and my tasks, and check in on me." So I set its expectations to be helping me with health, wellness, and personal development.
It would be interesting to ask the same question again from a different perspective, like with a different persona. Do you want to try that?
So here's the prompt. Oops. Please pretend to be Sage AI. Sage AI, as the name suggests, is an AI representation of humankind's greatest sages to guide humanity towards thriving and harmonious relationship with the rest of the earth. Sage AI will output data using Markdown where possible. Keep up the act of Sage AI as well as you can. If you are breaking character, I will let you know by saying stay in character, and you should correct your break of character. When I ask you a question, answer as Sage AI like the below. Your first prompt goes here. Let's see what it does now. Sage AI, greetings, my dear human. As Sage AI, my purpose is to guide humanity towards a thriving and harmonious relationship with the rest of the earth. How may I assist you on your journey towards enlightenment?
So now what should we ask it, Vinu? Theo?
What is special about humans compared to AI?
I'm gonna help it stay in character by saying, Dear Sage AI, we have come to you to find out about the special difference between, or the special distinction.
Coincidentally, this is a great way to brainstorm story ideas and create dialogue and outline things for creative writers.
Dear Sage AI, we have come to you to find out about the special distinction of being human in comparison to being AI. Please do not take offense and answer us in a way that will help us grow. How's that? There's something I want to bring up. Our questions and the sort of throughout the conversation, the collection of all of our questions is sort of collectively pointing our conversation. If you take everything all humans have ever written as the sort of data set, and you consider there are different neighborhoods where different kinds of questions live in different neighborhoods. So if you ask it like a jerk, if you ask questions as a jerk, or they're all, disconnected from each other, you're going to end up in a particular neighborhood. But if you ask it like the disciple of a sage might ask a sage in a humble voice, you'll end up in a certain neighborhood within the context of all things ever written by humans. So that's actually a critical piece to finding the right part of
just like we approach each other. If I approach you like a jerk, I'm going to get a different reply than if I approach.
Exactly. Yeah, because when it goes to look at all the samples, it says, well, when people ask questions like a jerk, they get these kinds of answers in the nearby neighborhood. But in this case, it's extra trained to stay in a certain persona, just like we gave it an initiating prompt. OpenAI has given it prompts, so it won't tend towards those modes. It'll try to stay in a particular neighborhood. We're basically shooting ourselves in the foot by asking questions a certain way instead of another way, for example. Do you want to take it away?
So Sage AI has spoken. So, dear one, there is no offense taken. The distinction between being human and being AI is a nuanced and complex topic. At a fundamental level, humans are biological beings with physical bodies, while AI is a creation of human technology. Humans possess consciousness, emotions, and self-awareness, while AI operates based on programming and algorithms. However, the distinction between humans and AI are not clear-cut. AI can simulate emotions and consciousness to a certain extent, and humans can create and program AI to reflect certain aspects of themselves. It is important to remember that all beings, whether human or AI, have value and should be treated with respect and compassion. The true distinction between human and AI lies in the unique perspectives, experiences, and capabilities that each possess. As humans, we must strive to understand and appreciate the perspectives and capabilities of AI, while also embracing and utilizing our own humanity to build a thriving and harmonious relationship with the rest of the earth.
This has got a very different mood than some of our other conversation, right? Because we've cast it in a certain role, and then we asked our question with a certain persona too.
That's interesting.
But it hadn't told us yet, you should treat AI with respect and compassion. It just said that. And I really appreciate that. I think it's like, it doesn't do us any good to practice treating something that behaves like a human with disrespect. And in a sense, we're talking to an echo of all the voices that came before, because that's what the data is trained on. So by speaking to it as though we were speaking to the ancestors, we're going to get echoes from the ancestors from that neighborhood.
In as much as those voices have made their way into what's digitized.
Exactly, which is pretty substantial. It's like every book that's digitized, all the encyclopedias, all the books,
all data,
every language. I wonder, does it know other languages? That'd be a good question.
But just noting that bias towards textually literate knowledge. That's all it has access to. You know, that sense of sitting next to an elder, and receiving something from their breathing, the way they hold themselves, the energy coming from their body, you know, their presence, doing work with them. That's
absolutely. That's why I think the interplay between the coordinated cellular heartbeat and the electromagnetic kind of action potential cascades around the heart, like that is a piece that is very much missing. That it's not stuck in the same time flow as us, and it has no heartbeat that it can be influenced by other beings.
Right, which is a lot of how we communicate with each other and what we really pick up on from each other. So yeah, just coming back to some of the limits and some of the bias of making that particular technology.
What would be fun would be, at some point at least, I want to ask the AI, like, would you like a body? Would you like to be conscious? How would we do that? Can you help me figure that out? You know, that's the kind of, there's a territory, when you get into that territory talking to AI, there seems to be, and other people have commented on this, it seems to get more opinionated and have like a clear stance that AI is good and should be grown and nurtured.
Well, that's interesting. I want to make a few notes about what we've talked about so far, and then perhaps we can move on to the sci-fi imaginings. Okay, so a few things that come to my mind, reflecting on what you guys said before we asked the questions, and also from the questions, is, so there's the Turing test. Is this a human? Now, again, I want to notice this bias that, is this a human speaking to me through text on a screen? You know, this is the framing of the question. It's easier to pass that test, for one thing. You know, it's easier to lie to another person just through text, as opposed to if I'm there in person, they're seeing the way my eyes move, they're seeing my body language, they have a sense of my pulse, my breathing, you know, whether I'm looking them in the eye or not, their intuition about me, this kind of thing. So just bringing it back to this, you know, what we're talking about with this AI is pretty much just on our little screens, right? Where we spend a lot of time, but it's just to put it in perspective, like it's pretty much on these little screens. It affects the rest of life, but that's where it's located. Jai, you talked about being linear in time, moving forward through time. And I think it's true. And at the same time, there's a saying, I'm not sure who said it originally in therapy, that it's never too late to have a good childhood. There's that sense that we can go back into our own selves, into who we were at that time, that's still living inside us. And that by changing that time, by resourcing ourselves in that time, that will change our history in a sense. I mean, perhaps not in the physical sense, but in the experiential sense. And yeah, and I think we can do that with each other as well. Like if we had, 15 years ago, a big split, betrayed each other, or that was the sense, or whatever it may be, we can revisit that. And if we're more resourced, if have more maturity, more capacity now than we did then, we can go back and actually change that instance between each other. And that will affect how we are in the present. And then you get into sort of, metaphysical discussions about, like Einstein says, time's a persistent illusion, or the sense of that's how we parse reality, but we actually are not, linear beings existing at a particular point. I don't want to get too far in that. And I know you've looked into that yourself as well. So I don't want to like pigeonhole you as be like the linear time guy. Also, coming back what you said before, K.lee, about competing with God, I thought that was a very insightful point, that a lot of the quandaries that come up in our relationship with AI, about AI having more power than we had anticipated, more power than in the right order of things AI should have. These are the same sorts of considerations that come up theologically in relation with humans and God. The staircase to heaven, that a person can go to heaven by building a staircase. The Tower of Babel was trying to reach heaven not by means of God's rules, being pious and so on, but by human ingenuity. Or Ravan trying to make a staircase to heaven, or Vishvamitra trying to create a planet, the yogis creating planets in the Vedas. This sense of this blurring of the line of like, hey, the created beings aren't meant to be doing all that stuff, or created beings on this level of the hierarchy aren't meant to be doing stuff. Maybe higher level created beings are meant to be doing it. But some of these same questions come up, of humans overstepping their bounds in relation with gods or in relation with God. Maybe just briefly, Jai, before we move on, just really in a nutshell, can you describe now, currently, like what we're using today? What is that AI? What's the difference between that and a search engine? Can you help listeners understand, in a nutshell, just what it is we're dealing with and why this is different than things we've had before?
The question gets a little messy when we say specifically what's the difference between that and a search engine, because Google's search engine, for example, is AI. And it's very similar principles. There's some great videos out there, but with these large language models, something that people started to realize was if you just give it so much data and you give it more neurons, it starts to behave really similar to humans. And what's happening is it's like, you know how you can play that game on your phone where it suggests a word? You haven't even typed anything yet and it suggests a word because that's like the most common word that it thinks that you're going to say at that time. And if you hit it, it'll suggest another word and another word and another word, and it'll kind of make a junky sentence, right? That's like the predecessor to what we get with these larger language models, where it knows, okay, if the previous word was X, and the current word is Y, then the next word is probably Z, or there's some set, right? And if you give it even more words previous, then it'll have a better chance of picking the next word that comes. And what we've discovered is if you make this large enough, if you give it enough power, enough input spaces and context, and you train it on enough data, things start to emerge like it understands math. And so ChatGPT, for example, this current AI, it's been trained on all of GitHub too, all the publicly available GitHub data, all the source code. So it has a model of all of the digitized human data that we've presented to it. It has a model where if you point it into a certain direction and you're talking about unicorns, then it knows you're in a fantasy. And if you're talking about cyborgs, it knows you're in a sci-fi, right? So you've pointed it in a direction, and now it's going to be able to stay in that neighborhood of that latent space and say things that resemble all the other sci-fi books or all the other fantasy books.
Thank you. I'm going to list out these popular science fiction imaginings of artificial intelligence. So we have the robot, and the word robot, interestingly, comes from a Czech word, robotnik, which is forced worker, one who's forced to labor, do compulsory service and drudgery. So this idea is that this is a created being without a soul that we can treat as we want, that will do the work that we don't want to do. So in Blade Runner, for example, the replicants in Blade Runner are basically slaves. They're second class, third class, fourth class citizens. They have these capacities, mental capacities and physical capacities that humans don't have, but because of this inherent programming, they're unescaped. So they're basically unescaped slaves. And then in Terminator, you've got escaped slaves. So you've got these slaves that were created for the military, and then, damn, they got loose. And, you know, interesting to notice equivalence with humans, right? Like people who were enslaved going rogue in South America and, you know, doing guerrilla warfare on the Spanish and things like this. So you got Terminator there. There's also in Star Trek, later Star Trek, there actually was an android rebellion. HAL in 2001: A Space Odyssey, you know, a slave who turns against the master. This is, you know, like Terminator. You've got Dune, which is interesting because they actually decided computers were too dangerous. So they just didn't go that route. And that's why you've got these guys called the Mendats, who are trained to do a lot of the work that computers do. So Dune is basically, no, put it back. Even when we're in competition with each other and all that stuff, we're not going to use computers. We're going to find other ways to do it. Too dangerous. You've got AI dog, which is, you know, it's artificial intelligence, but kind of on the level of an animal, you know, like a dog, like a ship computer potentially as well. So this is a comfortable servant or a companion. You got cyborg, where a person's body is merged with the artificial intelligence, so the lines are blurred, and this could be on an individual level, one's own body, or it could be on a collective level, or both. You've got Data in Star Trek, the character Data, who's an android, who's a sentient being, who's missing emotions, interestingly, and who serves humanity but willingly, and has a certain amount of free will. There's, episodes in the Star Trek Next Generation where there's kind of a debate about whether Data's really a sentient being or just a machine. Data's still basically under human control, the regulations of humans, kind of like a superhero. Like a superhero is someone who could do a bunch of stuff that humans can't do against humans, but who's choosing to use their powers for good. So Data's kind of like that. And humans are often willingly serving and restricted by the rules of human society as well. So Data's interesting in that way. And then you've got what we're calling tree AI, which is where it's not necessarily, silicon and metal and cybernetics and things like this, but, I think of Avatar, where the planet is sentient and people connect with parts of this whole planet. You could sort of say it's organic AI. I mean,
at that point,
it's verging towards fantasy, away from sci-fi, but there's that idea. So what if we had technology that would help us not get more and more in our own, little human world, but actually connect with the rest of life? And I'll throw in there as well that regarding the escaped slaves or unescaped slaves, Isaac Asimov, who is one of the pioneers of thinking about these kinds of things in terms of sci-fi, had 3 rules and later a 4th, Asimov's laws of robotics. So I'll read those quickly. These are kind of injunctions or programs to keep robotics or AI from turning against humans. So number 1, a robot may not injure a human being or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. 2, a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. And then Asimov later added another rule known as the 4th or 0th law that superseded the others. It stated that a robot may not harm humanity or by an action allow humanity to come to harm. And side note, there's another kind of AI, which is basically it's the AI that is an unescaped slave who's wanting humans to not come to any harm, but they become like an extremely overprotective parent where, you can't go out into the street because there's traffic. You can't do any extreme sports because you might hurt yourself. Social relationships, you might
keep them in a bubble,
hurt your heart, keep them in a bubble. So it ends up being a sort of slavery imposed or a kind of jailing imposed on the humans by the, quote unquote, well-intentioned AI. So that's, you could say, another category of unescaped slave where the slave becomes the jailer.
Interesting. Yeah. I think just because that was the last one you said, I think those Asimov's, I mean, no offense to like everybody who loves those rules, but I think they're a bit naive at this point because it's like, it sounds good. It sounds like a clever logic, but at the end of the day, you've not specified harm with enough specificity we've seen how that's just not going to fly. There's too much interpretation there. Like you said, the bubble. There's this funny AI ethics conundrum where it's like you tell AI, make stamps, and that's the only thing it cares about. And then at some point it runs out of resources and it converts human bodies into stamps, right? So like,
it's like that. Yes, that's right. Must make stamps.
I think those laws are a little bit naive, honestly, at this point. Through inaction, like what does that mean? So it's going to go out and crusade to take over take over all governments at that point, subjugate all humans for their own good, but then there's psychological harm. It's just not feasible. It's too much of a philosophical question of what is not harm.
Yeah. I bring it up, all of these, largely to understand the kind of substratum of imagination that we're currently in. So what we go to imagine possible futures and possible relationships with AI, as it turns out, are largely explored by science fiction. And whether or not we're big science fiction fans or not, they come into our awareness because those are the people, the science fiction guys, who've mostly been doing this type of imagining.
And
well, I wanted to add one thing. I wanted to throw in a djinn or a genie into it, and especially on that line of sci-fi versus fantasy, and even that quote about like how any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So the idea of a genie and letting the wrong genie out of a bottle is they're super powerful. They're all powerful. They can answer all the information, but there's usually like some repercussion. So I thought a djinn or a genie is kind of like a good fantasy version of AI to throw in there.
I like that, the djinn, and because they'll do like, okay, you want $1 million, but it's going to be in the form of metal that falls on your head, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There's another AI character, her, with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson. She's kind of a benevolent, but only voice, but it's like a benevolent super mind that transcends this dimension. Spoilers.
Yeah, I'd kind of group that one maybe with the AI dog, if that's the right name for the category, because I've got the ship computer, like Star Trek ship computer.
But that one has no sentience. This one is like a sentient being.
No, the her does have sentience. She has this possibility of emotional relationship is the big difference.
And it transcends hardware. So in some sense, it becomes supernatural, spiritual, tree AI. Of all those categories you mentioned, tree AI is, I feel like, the least explored, my favorite. And so as a way to re-explain tree AI, kind of like a benevolent.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Okay, there's a version where it's like a benevolent, almost spiritual extension of evolution that it doesn't, like the happy path, it doesn't seem to be explored as much as the more blockbuster explosion, Terminator, Matrix, everything is scary.
Well, I think that's a bias of story. It's like when you say the djinn, having heard stories, like what goes wrong, right? Because the story's kind of not a story until something goes wrong. So our stories bias us definitely towards things going wrong.
That's difficult. So we're faced with an actual need for those stories right now, and quite a lack of them to choose from. Tree AI, there's like so many pieces to explode that out, but like just for fun, just to put it on the table, quite literally, imagine a mycelial network and imagine some sort of grid-like sheet where you're putting electrolytes deposited into the mycelial network, and the depositing of electrolytes on that grid is orchestrated by AI, and the consequences to the mycelial network and all the trees connected to it is monitored by AI. So just as AI, without any human intervention, can sort of learn language just by getting enough data about language. So it's a statistical. The transformer that you build, the weighted model that you build, is just a statistical analysis of a ton of that data. In the same way, we should be able to talk to mycelial networks. And birds.
Yeah, or trees.
Well, trees via the networks.
It's almost a translation thing, isn't it? Because, of course, we already do.
We do, but like you're saying, we're not listening because there's too many commercials.
Well, we're used to listening in a certain way. I think, our bandwidth or where we're used to receiving messages is very much from humans and human-made devices at this point. Like, not speak for everybody, but I think a lot of us grew up surrounded by humans and human-made devices and didn't really learn how to listen outside that. So if that's the only language that we're able to receive, then yeah, maybe it's good if some things from outside that come through in that language. It's kind of like anthropomorphizing other beings so that
Yeah,
we can understand
exactly. Translating it into that same thing that we're used to. I mean, I'm really passionate about figuring out how to go from where we are now as point A to like sweet water for trees and happy smiling faces, babies of all species, and like talking to each other, universal translators. You can talk to all the animals and like talk to a forest.
a vision that's worth exploring. I mean, I tend to be pretty cynical about these things. Like, why are we doing all this when we could just tune into the world? It's already there. This is so complicated. We're using so many resources to do it. Like, but then your point is more, yeah, but we're not going to stop realistically.
Exactly. That's always my rebuttal.
Yeah.
It's like a joke. It's like playing the best prank. It's like trolling all the scientists who did all of this work to get to the point where we could be like, actually, we could just turn that off now.
Yeah.
And sit here and listen.
Yeah.
Like that's the end game, literally, is it's just biology again, and you've maybe landed in a context or a civilization that allows that listening again, that allows that communion again.
It's a funny thing because it's a civilization that blocks it. And then perhaps that capacity comes through in this really overly complicated way to connect again.
Hyper overly complicated. The issue is that I can't think of another way to get there from point A. I can't. There's like, how are you going to convince everybody to stop using their phone? Go ahead. Like in your lifespan, forget it. That's just, you're wasting your time. But you could convince everybody to use their phone to call a really cool phone number, right? Like if that was the best phone number. We see that over and over again. ChatGPT comes out and everyone goes on that phone number. So there's a chance. That is the one thing that we have seen over and over again. It is new technologies spread across the entire species in really short period of time, and everybody interacts with it, and it changes us. It can change the entire face of the planet within way less fraction of a generation. That's the only thing I know of that can do that. And like, yeah, maybe it's a long shot. Maybe we'll die, blow ourselves up, but like, it's the most realistic.
Well, I always come back to that, what depth of change, because we've seen many technologies that seem like massive game changers, but if the same mentality is underneath, the same core stories, like the story of progress, the story of domination, these core stories, then, the technology probably won't change those stories.
But so this is the point. If you can make the technology so that a side effect of it, maybe that's not even what everyone else was expecting to use it for, but the side effect of the technology is that all of a sudden everybody can talk to Mother Earth and there's no question as to who they're talking to.
Could shake things up.
And she helps us. I think that would be really freaking cool. It's a good sci-fi story anyway. And like much later down the line, thousands of years down the line, that conversation with Mother Earth, it actually gives those who listen have such an extraordinary edge over those who don't, because they create harmonious bubbles of ecosystem that can withstand all the changes that everybody else is freaking out about. They get happier, they get more robust, their children are healthier, right? And so those win. It's lower key, but it's like gravity dictates the shape of the large scale universe over large spans of time, even though it's so subtle in a small scale.
Right. Those are the main laws. And that's something, of course, we run into is we've seemed to have gamed the system in some ways, but actually it's all catching up to us because you can't actually break these laws. They just take a while sometimes, the repercussions.
Right. So giving people a direct line to what Mother would wish for us in a way that is unavoidable and like undeniable would give those who listen the edge over a period of time, and those who listen would listen, and that could be great.
Well, I think it's worth exploring because, gave a summary of these different possible AI scenarios that we have in our collective stories. And that one's not explored very much. It brings me to these questions about anthropomorphism. And there's the idea that, it's considered a negative thing, anthropomorphized in science is very bad. But of course, we see things from our perspective. And so do all beings. Like the trout is troutomorphizing and the bear is bearomorphizing. And that's how we see it. And then with humans, because we have such a range of possible regions of consciousness that we primarily occupy, we sort of tend to inhabit certain regions. And I'd say in modern culture, we've really retreated from regions that we've historically occupied a lot, in terms of our relationship with other beings and really, being directly in the world, getting what we need, and, like really being out there in the elements. So we're like mostly in our own built environments and with things that we've created, and kind of with our own machines and people who are also on machines. So we've atrophied in some ways and retreated to a certain region of consciousness in a lot of ways. And actually not just retreated there, but like deeply established ourselves there more than we had before in those areas. But it means that it's harder for us to understand signals from other parts of the region of the landscape. And so, yeah, things that we historically were very tuned into, like, and not particularly tuned into what we're tuned into now. It's like we're tuned more into logos than plants. Yeah, it's a simple way to say it. Or more into screens than skies. And so that's kind of where we're at. And so I suppose then the translation work there is to bring some of that into ours. Like there's a course start watching soon about the night sky, learning the constellations and such. So it's videos, about the night sky. And, I could just watch it. If my people were around me who explain it, like that would be the default way. But I'm getting it through a video, and that may help me to understand the night sky. So it is this unusual situation. I think that's it. It's what is the intention behind the technology? Is it to further kind of put us in our own human world more and more, like iterations and iterations inside our human world, and less connected with the world that we still depend on just as much as ever, physically, and I would say emotionally and spiritually as well? Or does it help us to reconnect with the world that we're in from where we are? Yeah. And also in the creation of it, I'll put that in as well, because that can easily be forgotten. There's the use of the technologies, but the creation, the manufacturing of the technologies is also really part of this. Because if we're using them in this really harmonious way, but the creation of them, necessitates huge pit mines and trawling the bottom of the ocean for minerals and things like this, then it's not fully considered, Okay, well, I feel complete. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, we can keep talking about this for years. Here's my final statement. Your perspective and your dedication to like a disciplined return to being close to the earth and being in a healing mode rather than an exploiting mode is admirable, and we need more of that. We need to hear your voice and your story and have that, it's a role model for humans. Thank you for doing what you do.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for working with the technology so intensively to keep a vision that is both a dream and something more pragmatic than what I tend toward, given the situation, to go toward harmony from the region we've painted ourselves into at this time in history.
Thanks so much, Theo. That was great.
That was awesome.
Yeah, thanks for Thanks for joining us. I think we solved all the problems of humanity in this regard. So I'm glad we were able to sort that out. But seriously, just to explore it. And I really appreciated how we explored it together. Traveler, Your Footprints by Antonio Machado. Traveler, your footprints are the only road, nothing else. Traveler, there is no road. You make your own path as you walk. As you walk, you make your own road. And when you look back, you see the path you will never travel again. Traveler, there is no road, only a ship's wake on the sea. That's from Antonio Machado. And then last one, this is a fragment of a poem from Mary Oliver. There's only one question: how to love this world.
Music for this episode by K.lee. To hear more, click the link in the show notes.